folks, Miguel here for the Lights Out podcast. I'm going solo today. No Chris, no Mike. It's just me. I'm getting ready to interview Bryan Robinson. Now, Bryan Robinson's a guy with over 100 fights on Sherdog. Normally, this interview might bring everybody on board, and we might do a deep dive with him. He didn't make the UFC. He's got a losing record, but anybody with 100 fights has got to have some stories, right? But we're going to concentrate on one aspect of Bryan's career, and that is his 8 fights with Travis Fulton. I don't want to keep beating the Travis Fulton horse, but something should be done about his record and the falsifications that went into his record and his whole fake Iron Man reputation, because, we had a sociopath in the sport there, and, the charges he pled guilty to and everything on that end, very sad, but we won't be discussing that sort of stuff here. We're just really going to concentrate on the record, the fake fights, the fights where he went to the fights with his opponents. And I want to know what happened there with the boxing commissions and the paperwork and stuff. So we're going to see. Bryan's promised to be very forthcoming. Bryan wants to tell the truth about everything that went on there with the Travis Fulton saga. He's not a fan of Travis, even before Travis, offed himself. So what we have here is a little bit of a cleaning up to do. We want to clean up some of the fake fights on the record there. Maybe Jeremy Horn, maybe another fighter out there is actually the fighter with the most fights and not Travis. So that's important. I think the databases have a lot of mixed up fights and wrong fights that shouldn't be on there. And that's important too. So that's what this is all about. And very shortly, I'll be joining you with Bryan Robinson. Hey, Miguel here for the Lights Out podcast. And I am joined by veteran Bryan Robinson. Bryan, from the Midwest scene, if you look on Sherdog or the database, he's got over 100 fights to his career. Bryan, how you doing?
Not too bad, not too bad.
Thank you for joining us. Bryan's here for a specific reason. We're going to talk about, he has 8 fights on the MMA side and 3 fights on the boxing side against Travis Fulton, the recently, deceased. And we're going to talk about those fights because, I don't know that they should be considered real competition and real fights in some of those cases. And there's a lot of that around Travis. Bryan, I give him kudos. He's the first person who's fought him to step up and say, yeah, I'll go on and tell the truth. So Bryan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know you're from Iowa and that area. And if I'm wrong, just correct me. And how'd you get into this?
I'm from Iowa. Basically what happened was, I grew up wanting to do professional wrestling. So what happened was me and a buddy of mine were walking around one of the county fairs here, stumbled across Chad Brigmeyer's little exhibit promoting Iowa Challenge 3, which was Travis Fulton versus Dan Severn. Talked to him for a little bit, bought some tickets, went to the show, and then then I found out that they were doing weekly fights every Sunday here at a local sports bar where anybody could sign up and go fight. So that's where I had my first fight at. That's where I met Travis. And then from there on out, I was only wanting to do it maybe 1 or twice, get in the ring, just to prove to some bullies, that, hey, I wasn't afraid to get in there and, and take care of myself or protect myself. So it just took off from there. He just kept calling me, kept inviting me to, different weekly events. And eventually I just stuck with it, and it lasted about 12 or 13 years.
Okay. Now, Travis called you or Chad called you or some combination of both of those guys?
A combination of both of them. A lot of my fights, I want to say mainly were for Travis because he did have several shows. Everything on, my record and his record, from Tuesday night fights to Sunday night fights to Thursday night fights. And then he had a couple actual, names for his shows that he put on, but it was all
Iowa Challenge, I think, Iron Man Challenge, that sort of stuff. So and that's part of, there's one thing to be said, in the early days, Travis, in the 90s, 98, 97, when he debuted, did UFC and stuff, he had a chance to go somewhere. And he's not somebody, even when he didn't train, he went from 205 to being, 250 Iowa, and is still a big, strong, sturdy dude, not a lot of injuries. Talk about a little bit about his charisma, or like how people, like, he just kept calling you? Is that what it was? Was he a nuisance, or how did he attract you? How did you, get into that?
It wasn't really a nuisance. Like, at first, before I started getting pressured into fighting him, is like, I'd go around and help out with the shows or whatever, help set up the ring and sign up to fight and whatnot. And back then, fighters weren't a dime a dozen like what they are now. So, if you look at my record and some of the people's records on there that I fought, it looks like it's the same group of guys just traveling all over the state and fighting each other. And that's basically what it was, because, he'd have, shout outs during the show and stuff for people to sign up to fight, but nobody would sign up to fight. So it'd be like, okay, well, I'd get there and fight, one guy once a night and then fight him again the next night, or it'd be Travis in there trying to, put on some sort of promotional deal where he'd just get in there and, and clean house for a night,
Yeah.
As far as me fighting him, the first time.
Well, hold on. Let me ask you though. So now you're in that circuit, or is that like, okay, you're going to fight this guy and the guy, maybe, like you said, you're about the same level. So you guys go out and put on a show. Is it like an 80% fight, or you're really fighting, or or Travis is telling you who won? How low did it go right from the beginning?
Oh no, there were fights like with me and whoever else, there were fights, but there'd be a couple times, where I'd get in there with Travis or whatever. And he'd just be like, okay, I'll carry you, into the next round, because he didn't want to completely beat on somebody that he needed to fight the next night in a different city. So, I mean, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm looking at it. So the first time you actually got in the ring with him was Waterloo. Now I'm not totally familiar with, small town Iowa stuff. Where was he from? What was his hometown?
He's from Cedar Falls, which is, it's Waterloo, Cedar Falls is connected, so it's pretty much the same area.
Okay. So you're fighting in his hometown, and it's a 30-second spinning back kick. So you knew him already. You'd been in the circuit a couple of years. Talk about this show. How did he, this is called Kick Fest. How did he talk you into it, or did you know you were fighting him that day, or
is that fight
by fight?
Is that Kick Fest the 30-second one? Is that on my MMA record?
Yeah, it shows Kick Fest 6, and it shows just that fight, and then Ryan Clark and John Patterson, the only show, but it's on Sherdog. Yeah.
Yeah, that was actually a kickboxing match.
Oh, okay.
So I don't understand what that's doing on an MMA record, but then again, he had access to all those databases and stuff back then though too, from one of his own shows. I honestly don't remember that one. It's hard to remember each and every, single fight, unless it's on tape or, or DVD.
Mm-hmm. But what was it? Is it like what we've heard he's done? Jeremy Horn was the person who said that he'd witnessed him do it. Is all right, Brian. Me and you are going to get in there, and obviously, you have respect for the guy, and the guy, you figure, hey, he's ahead of me or above my level, so he's asking you to do him a favor, right? So he tells you, I'm going to carry you all, and then I'll arm lock you, and then he kicks you in the head. Is that something that you experienced?
Oh yeah, yep, yeah, definitely. I mean, not only like actually fighting him, but we'd be traveling to a show together. I can't remember the name of the show, Cage something. It was in South Dakota. Mm-hmm. That should be on there. I think it was like a standing Kimura or something he got me in.
Okay.
But we were like 20 minutes outside of the town where we had to be for the fight. And he told me that my opponent backed out. And he wasn't actually supposed to fight that night. So he's like, well, we're going to fight. And I'm like, well, I rode along with you for 8 hours, going to get in there and do it, just make some money. Why not? So when we get there, how they have like the little flyers and fight card, pamphlets and stuff already printed up and stuff with pictures and whatnot. Me and him were on there, and I'm sitting there thinking, was I actually supposed to fight Travis or fight somebody else? And he just tried to, he's done that several times, to me, myself, and a couple other fighters.
Okay. So let me ask you, when it comes down to like pay and stuff, Travis also managed your pay when he was he's like, all right, you're going to fight me. I'm going to give you $200 or, whatever it was. Or did you ever actually talk to a promoter?
whenever I traveled with Travis, it was all through him. So looking back now, I'm sitting there wondering, okay, well, was I actually supposed to get more and he just pocketed some? Because my first fight that I fought Ron Faircloth, I traveled up to Racine, Wisconsin, and I walked out of there with $25, to get in there. And I was still in high school then too, and I think right around that same time is when Ron got the UFC call.
Mhm.
That happened then, and it happened on our boxing match. It was for Capital Promotions. We get in there, and I think it was Reggie Strickland and Tyrone Roberts as the main event. But I get in there with them, with Fulton, and we do our thing or whatever. Obviously, I get beat. I'm getting ready to leave and waiting to be paid and stuff. And he's like, "Oh, well, the promoter said, that he doesn't have enough money in the budget for our fight." And I'm sitting there thinking, "That's Crockett." So that right there told me that I probably got stiffed, man.
Yeah, $25 is low even for Strasser, and yeah. So let me ask you. So you always went through him; he dealt with it and stuff. But in those early shows, 2003 Kick Fest, it's kickboxing. All right, so you're dealing with him and the promoter, or maybe he's the promoter and stuff. You mentioned boxing. Now, in boxing, I know the Iowa Boxing Commission isn't, a powerhouse. And sometimes I think actually Illinois steps in and oversees some of the boxing that goes on in Iowa. But how did that procedure go? Because you would have had to be licensed and you would have had to present medicals and things for some of those fights. Did Travis say, "Hey, I got you, I line all that up for you"? Is that the way that was?
Pretty much like the first time we boxed, yeah, that was set up a couple days in advance. And, back then you didn't really have to have any kind of medical paperwork. They didn't introduce the blood work deal to have that done until like 2010. And I think the first time I boxed him was like 2003.
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly did that fight just because, he's like Butterbean versus Dan Severn is going to be there. And me growing up with my professional wrestling background, it's like, hey, I just saw those guys slug it out on that brawl for all thing that they had, in the WWF thing. So I'm like, cool, I got to be on that kind of a card. So yeah, it was just get there and fill out some paperwork for a boxing license. And it was like a $25 fee. And then they sent it in the mail. But the next time around, it was just basic old school. You get in there and you sign a waiver and, you're going to fight.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean.
So now, doesn't the Boxing Commission at some point ask you for like a one-page separate contract where you got to disclose your pay and that sort of stuff? Is that just some of the paperwork you guys did there and got taken care of, or did you never not pay attention to that stuff? Because he's actually got to tell the Boxing Commission what you're going to make.
Yeah, the contract for the second time where I got stiffed, I never signed anything. The first time I did. I can't really remember the other. I think it was like another 2 times that I boxed him.
Okay. I've got the Box Rec has 3 fights officially for you guys. So
yeah,
it may have been more.
Yeah, so I remember the first 2. The second one, with Capital Promotions. It was at Prairie Meadows in Des Moines, and yeah, that's just the one that I just remember signing the waivers.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now there were fights you mentioned too, like where it was either he was doing tryouts or like you said, he did the show to bulk up his record. Now, did you witness any of those types of shows, like when he would, fight 3-4 guys in a row, or fight, the field of an 8-man tournament and pad his record with a bunch of wins? Because I think that was the goal there, was he knew if he was the guy with the most wins, he might be able to cash that in at some point. He knew the ins with the Boxing Commission. He was a guy who could spew out records on other people and stuff. So he, a so-called expert who was going to, argue with him and stuff. But, checking in with you, it's like, was it ever something like that was fair? Did he ever, do anything with that? Or were you witness to some of those nights?
I was witness to a lot of them. Like I said, you look at his record, look at all the Ironman Challenge, the ARCF, AFA, Cedar Valley Fighting Association. A lot of those guys on there, like, literally had no business being in the ring with him. Handpicked opponents, kind of like what Jeremy Horn said on, the first podcast you did. People back then didn't care. 2 people in a ring and a ref, that was a fight. And they just wanted to see somebody get pounded on. And Travis was the number 1 guy in the area. So yeah, and it's like, yeah, I've definitely witnessed, another thing that Jeremy said, that a lot of times, Travis didn't want to get in there with a guy that could potentially beat him or had, the slightest chance. I witnessed that a lot.
Now, I know you're a competitor too, and you got a ton of fights and stuff. So this isn't to put you down and stuff, but did you feel like you had a shot in some of those fights, or was it always something like, I'm doing him a favor, or like, how does he break that? Especially like if you get there, the Flyers got both of you. You were clearly fighting, and he just told you now. It's like, what does he need to do that to you for? Or was it something that you could have been competitive with him if he had given you a fair shot?
Oh, it's probably because he knew that I'd do it. Okay. He knew that if he needed a fighter, the situation that I just told you on the way to South Dakota, and he told me that my opponent backed out, blah, blah, blah. He knew that I'd do it, because, when I first started fighting and decided to keep going with it, the way that my mentality was okay, well, if I'm going to fight, I'll fight anybody. And, to me, fighting guys with, with his name, who have been in the UFC or were working their way to get there, to me, that made me look good, to look back and tell all these guys that, that picked on me and stuff in high school, like, hey, I went in the, got in a cage with a guy that would probably murder you, Mm-hmm. But a lot of it was, just him convincing, manipulating. If I didn't want to do it, oh, you pussy this, you pussy that. You said you spent some time with him, so how he talks.
Yeah.
Treats everybody.
See, I actually see a different version. Like I got him being like kind of immature and be like, come on, do me a favor, help me out, or we can do it this way because I had a little bit of power. It's like physically, obviously, it's not. I wasn't any threat that way, but I could threaten his career. So he was very, very nice to me, and he kept this sort of stuff far away. He realized I wouldn't like this sort of stuff on my show, and then he kept it far away. But you hear all this stuff going on, So let me ask you, how much total fight pay did you get for fighting him? Like, I mean, why? After the first time he knocked you out and gave you $25 for it, is it just something that he was so big in the area, like controlled things, or like why wouldn't you gravitate away from him in those types of situations? Or did you not feel wrong until later?
So basically what it was, it's like, I had offers from other promoters and whatnot, outside of Chad Bergmeyer and Travis. So when I wasn't getting calls for fights from outside promoters, I know that he always had some sort of show going on, all over the state of Iowa. He probably did 3 or 4 shows a week. So, and a lot of what it was, you get to some of these small little venues, or, they used to be like old school gymnasiums, and he'd have a ring set up, for show. And what would happen was, he'd have 20, 30 guys saying that they're going to show up to fight, but less than 10 showed up to fight. So, you got to make a show happen for paying customers. Mm-hmm. So he's like, hey, you want to fight? And then he convinced me to do it. He'd throw me $150, $200. The most I ever got to fight him was 500, and that was for my first boxing match against him.
Okay.
So, but I mean, it was pennies, A lot of what the fighters would make in his shows would be off of selling tickets. But with him being the promoter and the showrunner, there was a couple times where, people would be standing around waiting to get paid, and Travis already took all the money and he skipped town, screwing over the people that, that put their bodies on the line for him and fought in the shows.
So what was the atmosphere? Like, I know, once you get out into Iowa and the plains and stuff, like, space gets wide and it's big and stuff. Like, was he really like isolated and like the king of his small town? Is that kind of like a fair description of it for like the general public? Because like, why would 30 guys that didn't get paid like let him get away with a show 2 days later? You know what I mean? Why wouldn't everybody show up and just be like I said, I know he was tough in a one-on-one situation, but 30, if he did 30 guys, so what was up? What was his career? What was his cult of personality like in that area?
So the 20, 30 guys or whatever, saying the same thing that I said.
Mm-hmm.
He'd always go back to the whole deal on his, what I told you in the email, or even what he said on his own personal interview, like on his court hearings and stuff. People are just saying that because they knew who I am.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what he'd always say. So it's like, after a while I caught on, and, I know a lot of his dirty work that some people don't know, that I've spent enough time with him on the road, fought a lot of his shows, and, we had a lot of the same mutual friends. And it's like, he's different with everybody, but eventually, like, if the same people are starting to say the same things, obviously he's not as good of a person as what so-and-so, somebody else makes him out to be. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. And how would you classify Chad Bergmeyer? I mean, I just asking the question off the cuff. Is he someone who was making money with Travis and kind of his partner? Or is he another person who's kind of like a victim of Travis, like, kind of running the shows and being a front man?
As far as I know, they partnered up on a couple shows, just with Travis's connections and stuff, different promoters being able to bring in like actual legit fighters, in Waterloo, Cedar Falls. My experience with Chad was, it was pretty good. He, he did all the, what he said he'd do. He got me a fight in St. Louis with Joe Jordan. They partnered, several times.
Okay. So, but in terms of like, you would still work with Chad, and Chad's not really kind of responsible for Travis's shit. He kind of just let it go on his show. Is that how you classify it?
Yeah, they did their own separate deals, and
it makes sense. I'm not knocking him. I mean, the guy's a big name in the area. You're going to promote there. You got the number one guy. He starts asking for stuff. It becomes hard to say no, and Travis is one of those guys that works on you and is convincing and stuff in many ways. So now, would you, if we were being fair here, you fought him 3 times in boxing. Let's talk about the boxing matches first. You're Iowa? Are you a wrestler based? Like, did you compete as a wrestler in high school?
I should have, but I didn't.
Okay.
My idea back then in high school was just to get as big and muscular as I could for the whole pro wrestling deal. And I don't like the way that wrestlers cut weight, so I didn't wrestle. But looking back on it, I probably should have.
Okay. Now, but what about, like, I guess the thing about boxing is, to me, is that boxing is such a skill that to just take a guy that wasn't like, practicing boxing for a couple of years at least and put him in a boxing match against Fulton, that should stop at the commission level. At the commission level, they should say, no, we're not going to do this. But did you feel, I guess my question is in any of those 3 boxing matches, should they legitimately be on your record? I mean, did you feel like you had a chance competing in them, or should they really be clean off your record?
Okay, since they technically did happen, obviously they have to be on there. But no, I don't think that those fights should have actually happened. Okay. 1 or 2 of the fights, I was still in high school or just out of high school. So it's like, you get this kid, with massive balls dragging in the dirt, wanting to get in the ring with, a guy that just got out of the UFC. So, a world-class athlete. What do you think is going to happen? Yeah. Back then, the commission, they didn't really care much, as long as nothing super illegal was being done, and, and I was of age to get in the ring. So yeah, they didn't care much until, I want to say, probably 2009, 2010, when they started doing the suspending, for, if you lose within like the first couple rounds and you're suspended for 30 days. And okay. So yeah, they didn't really say much about it. But no, I don't think they should have happened.
Okay. But now, and what about, I'll ask you the same question about the MMA fights, because some of those, when you're driving with him and he tells you in the last minute and stuff like that, like, how many of those would you like to see? It's a couple losses off your record. What do you think? Would you take all 8 of them all? Like, I just want to know if they were fair competition, if you thought you were going to win them when going in.
Oh, no. Like, he always told me that, everybody's got a puncher's chance. But if it's somebody like me going in there, like somebody like him, there's almost no chance unless, you just, that 1% bit of luck,
Yeah.
So
yeah, he is, and I give him credit for, he got to that level of the sport where, he could be in there against anybody And, that's what he did in boxing too. Like he fought some very high level boxers, Gerald Washington, Chaz Witherspoon. And you got, at one point he had like a 500 record, and he confided in me that he had about 60 boxing matches at the time I spoke to him.
Yeah.
And he told me that for those 60 boxing matches, he had made more money than he had made for all his MMA fights combined.
Yep.
So somebody for Chaz Witherspoon, somebody there, they came up maybe with 25, 50,000 bucks or a payday like that. And that match was based off fights against you and, with all due respect, another competitor I remember from the old days, Ron Rump. Ron's 0-3 in BoxRec, all 3 fights against Travis. And I know Ron from the MMA scene. I don't think Ron was like, a boxer first and then, came over to MMA. I think Ron is probably in the same boat where he was talked into it. And, those shouldn't count as boxing. He got the money's his. He got it. He spent it. No one's going to take that away from him. But should that fight legitimately be a loss on your record? I don't know. I think it's open to a lot of questions.
The thing with his boxing record, and what I remember him telling me is obviously boxing pays more than MMA. It always has, probably always will. So what he would tell me was like, get in the ring a couple times with some nobodies, and that commissions and shows don't really look at their record. They look at the amount of fights, and the more fights you have, the more money you're going to make.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't understand why they wouldn't look at your record, but that makes sense as to why he had 60 or 70 boxing matches.
Yeah. To me, that the boxing thing is he was good enough to be presentable, because as a heavyweight boxer, that's a premium. There's just not so many of them. The reason I live in Costa Rica. The reason I talked to him is there was a contender down here named Carl Davis Drummond that I actually was asked to contact Travis about fighting. The fight didn't come through and it never happened, but that's why I talked to him. And he told me, he said for something like that, he expected a payday, because, Drummond at the time may have been in the top 15. So, but, with Travis, you're going to get a guy that looks credible. And that's, what he took advantage of. He could go do that and then be like, you meet him in Iowa, and it's like, how could the guy who just fought, an IBF contender, be here and do, how can we not trust him, do fake fights? And so it's very interesting the way his personality grew up. Like, what more can you tell us? Or give me one dirty story that he did somebody wrong here before we start to sign off a little bit.
As far as like fights go, or
or like you said, like when one where you remember where he stiffed a handful of fighters and just took the money and ran, kind of thing.
With all of his shows, like I said, he'd promise somebody, a certain dollar amount to get in there and fight, and he'd either get half or, he'd stiff them. If you look at, like I said, if you look at Travis's record and realize exactly how many of his fights on there were for his own shows, people are going to start wondering, okay, well, is this guy's record legit? Are these all legitimate quality fights? And they're not. I talked to Ken Shamrock a couple months ago, and he said, one of the phrases he said was quality over quantity. Mm-hmm. So, I was actually looking through my old VHS tapes of some of his shows last night for a buddy of mine, Kurt Marble. I fought him a couple times. And I noticed the second time he fought Brian Dunn and beat him, and it was in his first AFA show or whatever, he fought 3 times in that one night. So it's like, okay, well, you get this big bad, UFC fighter getting in there and fighting his own shows in his own tournaments, winning his own tournaments and winning his own belts.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like majority of them are handpicked opponents, that he knows he's going to win.
Yeah. No, it's a situation where, like I said, a commission won't let that happen now. Like you said, did Iowa's commission really not come online until 2009, 2010? Before that, it was a free for all.
Yeah, pretty much. They didn't come online until 2009, 2010. When right after they're about ready to ban the sport, countrywide. And then Ultimate Fighter came out, and they realized they could make money off of, doing the commission work for MMA. But yeah, I mean, not all that I know about him is bad. because, he has helped me out a little bit, here and there. And I got some good advice off of him. For as far as his charges and whatnot goes, obviously it's disgusting, wrong in all shapes and forms. Towards the end of it, about a year and a half ago, when he randomly just called me just to talk, just talk bullshit back and forth, he tell me how much he hated the fight sport and stuff anymore. And, he mentions it in his little interviews and whatnot. And I told him, I said, take that knowledge you have and go out and manage fighters or open a gym and, make money that way. But any of the information or advice that somebody like me, somebody lower than him, he just take it, throw out the window, because it's like, he always thought that he was unstoppable and didn't have to listen to anybody or take any kind of advice. I can go on and on and on, but just to make it short, towards the end, the last couple of years that I know him, I just lost all respect for him. I had some personal charges that I could have filed, but I gave him a chance to stop. And, I saw the paperwork and evidence on all that and whatnot, and it stopped. And obviously, what he did and what he chose to do and take his own life, it was the cheap way out, and the only person, people that he was hurting was his family,
Yeah.
So,
That's the sad part of it is when, Mike Davis, who we call the MMA detective on the podcast here, he's familiar with that. And he says, man, the victim in this is family. It has to be, just from the story there. And it makes it, all the more sad. I'm not those types of charges are beyond fighting, so I don't want to get too much into them. But like you said, it's unfortunately the kind of thing that was so big and so huge, he makes the news, again, and then all of a sudden now we're looking at the record and things, and then the Iron Man thing really is fake, it really is. And I, as a member of the MMA community, have to say we've sort of been complicit, just letting it happen for years, Jeremy knew, Monty knew, I knew, that we were people that had certain positions and stuff that it was going on, but then you never really want to take an action against somebody, right? And it was the guy's living, so he made a living off of it, but it was ugly. And I'm not surprised, like what you said, that when you get into the details that, he broke his word to a lot of people and that there were a couple of double crossing things like that, because for what else he did, it just shows in his character. So it's just an unfortunate situation. But for me, I kind of want to keep the name of the sport of MMA away from him. I don't want him to be the most prolific guy because it's not legitimate,
Yeah, exactly. That's what I said. It's like, he doesn't deserve the title for that. I've also talked to Shannon Rich, and Shannon Rich, he's fought a lot of credible guys, a lot of, majority of his career, a lot of credible guys. If anything, that should be flip-flopped, because Shannon's number one. Just because
I know Shannon also, Shannon or Horn, I'm not 100% set on Severn's record either, because I know Dan was a guy that's sort of the same thing without, the real criminal side, right? But Dan was a guy who's going to question Dan Severn coming to your show.
Yeah, I was at 2 or 3 of their fights together, Travis's and Dan's.
And that became a whole thing on the internet with them suspended and, Dan defending himself and stuff.
They weren't interesting fights at all. Like the first one, I would challenge 3, they're just in there dancing, throwing a couple punches, a couple takedowns, nothing really to finish a fight, So, that's about as far as I know about that. But I've seen a lot of Fulton's, main fights, 2 to 3 of his fights with Travis View. Fulton just got manhandled. What's funny about that though is that same fight card, Andre Roberts fought right before Fulton, and this was in the old square extreme challenge cage, and they had to do an intermission between those fights because Andre got slammed against the side of the cage, and the cage wall fell on the floor.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen a few of those old shows too. So yeah, no, you had to put up with that, but none of that stuff excuses the behavior you've been talking about with Travis. Bryan, I want to thank you very much for joining us. I want to thank you for being the first guy, brave enough to step up. A lot of people think, Travis, let's just let it fade into the past. And I'm with that. I don't want to keep dragging that out at all. But I do think that there's a correction that does need to be made on the official record. I thank you for joining us. And I thank you for stepping up to help us make that happen. I'll let you plug whatever you're talking about, or say goodbye here, and we'll sign off.
Just want to say, I did what I did. My record wasn't by any means good. I didn't want UFC stardom. I just got in there, and fought. And, towards the end of 2010, 2011, I see myself online for number 6 in the world for the most fights. So, if anybody else wants to talk, I don't care, it's get a hold of me. But yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, we definitely, I'd like to go through some of the other fights too at some point, because some of those small shows, very interesting. And that's where the best stories are. And we'll definitely hook up at some point down the line for that. But right now, I want to sign off. This is Bryan Robinson. We're calling him witness number 1, the prosecution against Travis Fulton. Thank you.